behind what he said there, which we'll get to momentarily. The internet's not great at nuance, and I actually think, of course, Democrats are trying to cover for what he said. And there's some conservatives who haven't been particularly helpful when it comes to framing the context behind what he said there. But then there was another clip in that same Fox News story where, I mean, it was almost as bad as the first one. Here it is.
If they're old enough to get pregnant, they're old enough to make their own decisions about what happens with their bodies. Okay? And parents do not have the right to change that.
Literally the stuff you throw up about. If they're old enough to get pregnant, they're old enough to have decisions about what. First of all, and parents don't have a right. There's a couple things there. You can't consent to sex at the age of 13. So the other thing I would say is that if you have a 13-year-old who got pregnant, clearly that's a 13-year-old who hasn't made the best life decisions as it is. And I can tell you that further cutting parents out of those decisions and out of their life is not going to improve that situation. So it's just insane. It's like somebody said, it's kind of like, I mean, he's basically saying, oh, if they're old enough to bleed, then they're old enough to make their own. It's just insane stuff. It's actually pretty disgusting. So, of course, this goes all over the internet. And people are emailing Senator Jamie Peterson's office to let him know that they're very concerned with what he said on Fox News. And Senator Jamie Peterson was responding to everyone with the same one-line response. How sanctimonious is that? Instead of addressing any concerns about what he said, about the reaction from parents, I've been sent multiple emails forwarded to me of the exact same response that Senator Peterson gave every one of his constituents who emailed him. And it was thusly: Dear so-and-so, that is the law in Washington and has been for 40 years. Best wishes, Jamie. Pronouns he, him. That is the law in Washington and has been for 40 years. So that is the very sad excuse that Senator Jamie Peterson is using to try to absolve himself of the horrifying statement that he made on Fox News, that he's now getting all this national, international attention for. So if you take that sentence at face value, and I think it's really important for people who aren't living and breathing politics in Washington state, who might be now just paying attention to this issue because they saw this clip of State Senator Jamie Peterson on Fox News or whatever it is. What I want to do is to do sort of a history lesson here, because what he's saying is true, but it's not true. What he's saying lacks the necessary context intentionally. I mean, he's lying and gaslighting as a way to, again, distance himself from reality. And so I want to get into this. First, I highly suggest you read, we published it today across all of our platforms, a guest op-ed that State Representative Travis Couture wrote. We republished it on unDivided with permission. If you go to any of our pages, you'll see it. The headline, How Washington's Mental Health Laws Strip Parents of Their Rights. So in it, he does a pretty good job laying out the historical context here of what Senator Jamie Peterson said, and then his lame excuse saying, well, I'm just reiterating what the law has been in Washington state for 40 years. I'll read just a little bit of Representative Couture, again, a Republican representing Allen, of his op-ed. He said, well, it is true that state law has allowed minors 13 and older to access mental health counseling without parental consent since 1985. The definition of mental health care has changed radically since then. He goes on to write, what once meant talk therapy and substance abuse counseling has now expanded to include gender-affirming medical treatments, psychiatric medications, and reproductive services, all without parental involvement. He says this is not a minor technicality. It is a fundamental shift in how Washington treats parental rights, and it is exactly why parents are fighting back. So with that knowledge, and we'll dive even deeper into it in a moment, but I just want to replay for you, again, what Senator Jamie Peterson said about the rights of kids over the age of 13.
Kids over 13 have the complete right to make their own decisions about their mental health care. Parents don't have a right to have notice. They don't have a right to have consent about that.
So when he says that, and then he gives the excuse to constituents who are concerned about that, well, that has been the law for 40 years. That's been the law since 1985. All I was doing is sharing with you what Washington state law does. He's full of shit because he's leaving out the reality that the law that existed and was passed in 1985 is a shadow of what the law is today. And that's because he personally, and the Democratic majority in Olympia, as Travis Couture points out, have dramatically expanded what mental health care means, and therefore what kind of things a 13-year-old can do without the consent or knowledge of their parents. You know, in 1985, if you're a kid and you're struggling and you want to sit down and talk to a therapist, and for whatever reason your parent doesn't want you to talk to a therapist, you can go do that. So you can work through some stuff, right? That's much different than saying, today, 2025 Washington State's definition of what's mental health care. Oh, gender dysphoria. Radical gender ideology. Access to reproductive rights. You can get pregnant and have an abortion as a 13-year-old child, and your parents don't know any of that happened, as if that's not bad for the mental well-being of a kid, and for parents to not know why their kid might be struggling emotionally, mentally, why they might be suicidal, whatever it is, you'd have no idea. Because Washington State Democrats, through a series of laws, in particular over the last 5 years, have expanded the definition of mental health care, and therefore the types of things that a kid age 13 plus can get in Washington State without parental consent. So when Senator Jamie Peterson says, well, that's just the law in Washington State, it's been the law since 1985. The law from today to 1985 is dramatically different. And he knows that. He knows that. But he's getting so much pushback for what he said, for saying the quiet part out loud. Parents don't have any rights, essentially. They don't have a right to know what's going on with their kids. Pushback, well, don't blame me. Blame the law. Blame the law in Washington State. But ignore the fact that over the last few years, we have systematically made changes to increasingly cut parents out of what's happening with their kids from a medical perspective, from a mental health perspective. I mean, he's lying, but he is so full of shit. And that is the majority leader in the state Senate. That is the person dictating policies and bills and what gets passed and what the caucus is going to support. It's truly mortifying stuff. And I haven't even gotten started on the fact that, now, I said earlier, and I'll reiterate, there were some conservatives on X in social media who were handed this gift. That interview with Senator Jamie Peterson was a gift. It was a gift for the rest of the world to see what we already knew was happening in Washington State. To hear something that extreme coming out of the mouth of one of the most powerful Democrats in Olympia. That was a gift that common sense people, right, left, and center, should have united around and said, see, this is how extreme they are. Instead, you had this segment of conservatives saying, why are you acting surprised by this? This is the law in Washington, essentially using the excuse that Jamie Peterson would give. And in doing so, they didn't capture any of the nuance in terms of how we came to that place and how this hasn't been the law forever. There has been steady expansions of that law. And it also, can you play, Nicole, one more time, the Jamie Peterson 13-year-old clip?
Kids over 13 have the complete right to make their own decisions about their mental health care. Parents don't have a right to have notice. They don't have a right to have consent about that.
Yeah, and so in saying, well, that's just the law, and conservatives saying, why are you acting surprised? This has been the law here forever and ever. And not bringing up things like the mature minor doctrine. So what Senator Jamie Peterson is saying there, he's essentially acting like kids are their own beings, and they just have the right to go out and do these things without their parents. And the truth is that across aspects of our mental health system and our healthcare system in Washington State, kids over 13 don't have the right to do everything without parental consent. That's the truth. Some conservatives get this wrong, but it's actually true that if you are under the age of 18, you can't go get your breasts removed or your genitals cut off without parental consent. You might think, and that's been, talked about in conservative circles, you actually can't do that. There are a lot of medical procedures that you need parental, even in Washington State, that you continue to need parental consent for over the age of 13 until you're 18 years old. However, we have something called the mature minor doctrine. And that means that if you're a 14-year-old who wants to cut your breast off and your parents understandably say no, You can find a medical provider in uber far left Seattle or wherever it is who will dub you a mature minor. And you can go in there and you can say, look, I want to do this. Here's the reasons why. And the doctor, of course, because there's activist doctors all over the place, they will dub you a mature minor. And then you can make literally any medical decision without parental consent, including chopping off your genitals or having your breasts removed in the name of extreme gender ideology. So Senator Jamie Peterson is almost in his mind, he's telling on himself, because he's sort of treating every case of minor health care as if the minor is a mature minor and has been deemed so under the law, which is not the case. But that shows you how easy they know it is. Senator Jamie Peterson and Democrats who push the mature minor doctrine in all of these bills, they know how easy it is in a blue progressive state like Washington for a minor to find a doctor who'll dub them a mature minor under the eyes of the law so they can get these things done behind the backs of concerned parents. They know that, and that's the point. The truth is, today in Washington state, regardless of what the laws restrict when it comes to what a minor can get done, if you're a minor and you are set on getting some sort of extreme, radical, gender-related surgery or healthcare, you can get it without parental consent. Because you can find a doctor here that will dub you a mature minor. Because let me tell you this, if you have doctors, and as we do in Washington state, we know, who are willing to put a 14-year-old child under the knife, look at I'm just going to say it, look at the nude body of a 13-year-old, 14-year-old child laying on their operating table and take a scalpel and cut that child's healthy breasts off, then that is a doctor who would be more than happy labeling any child a mature minor to be able to perform that kind of surgery on them. Because that's a doctor without any moral compass or hesitancy whatsoever. And then on top of that, you have to add in the fact that in 2023 in Washington state, we passed one of the most absurd, dangerous, anti-family bills that I have ever covered. And that was Senate Bill 5599. So much so that we took a lot of time that year trying to collect enough signatures to run a referendum on it. And what did Senate Bill 5599 do? Well, it allows the state to hide your child from you if you don't support that child getting gender transition surgery, hormone therapy, or whatever it is. That's literally a law in Washington state today, Senate Bill 5599. Democrats, like Jamie Peterson, said this is about protecting trans youth. But it's really about making sure that trans youth can get any sort of extreme gender health care that they want absent parental consent or absent any sort of approval or knowledge from parents. So now let's line all of this up so people properly understand what's happening in Washington state. In 1985, the ball started rolling on this. The legislature said if you're over the age of 13 and you want certain kind of medical mental health care, like, hey, you want to see a therapist or you want some sort of help with a substance abuse issue, you can do that. You don't need parental consent for it. So that was the door that opened up. And ever since then, they've expanded the types of health care. And I use that phrase so loosely because care is such a horrible word to talk about when we discuss some of these things. They've passed laws that have systematically expanded the types of things that a young child, 13 years old, 14 years old, can get done from a medical perspective without consulting their parents. They passed the mature minor doctrine, which basically said, hey, if you can get a doctor to approve it, you can get just about anything you want. That doctor will substitute for your parent when it comes to consent. And then they said, if you still have parents who are trying to interfere in all of this, we're going to pass Senate Bill 5599. And if your parent interferes with some of these radical things that we're allowing you to do under law, the state can literally kidnap your child. You can run away to a shelter that's run by the state of Washington, and where previously the state of Washington or that shelter would have to contact parents between 24 hours and 72 hours. Now they do not have to tell parents at all where their child is. And that child can live at that shelter under the watchful eye of the government. They can go find a doctor to dub them a mature minor, and they get their breasts cut off, or they can get gender hormone therapy, or they can get their genitals cut off. And then maybe one day they decide to go home to their parents, completely different person, scarred for life. That is what the law in Washington state allows for. And that is as extreme a position as anything Republicans in Washington state support. on any issue, across the spectrum, anything that's actually been genuinely debated, discussed, introduced in the state legislature in Washington, that is the single most extreme thing. Left or right, the single most extreme position. To rip a parent's rights away and to allow their child, and these are children, they're not mature minors, they're children. No 13-year-old is mature enough to consent to their body being mutilated for life. Not one. And not just a couple Democrats on the far fringe. The Senate Majority Leader is bold enough and feels confident enough in that position that he would go on Fox News and he would say this. I just got to play it again.
Kids over 13 have the complete right to make their own decisions about their mental health care. Parents don't have a right to have notice. They don't have a right to have consent about that.
That is horrifying stuff. And if you don't see that as the extreme position, if you don't see the Democrats in Washington state as the extremists, I don't know what would convince you more than that clip, than that 10-second clip. Watched now millions of times around the world, so everyone outside of Washington state knows what we're dealing with. And I had a message to reasonable Democrats, if they still even exist in our state, that the public opinion on radical gender ideology is shifting. And I think it's shifting quickly. And if you have one iota of hesitancy, of concern about what's happening when it comes to parental rights, I encourage you to jump off that ship, and we will more than happily extend a lifeboat to you. Or you can watch your political career sink to the bottom of the ocean with the likes of Senator Jamie Peterson, because it will be a year, 2 years, 3 years before history will look back on this and see it as the extremism, the dangerous extremism that it is. And so not only do you have this, again, it's not just one Democrat, it's the leader of the Democrats in the state Senate in Olympia. And I would note that every single Democrat in the state Senate voted to advance the bill last week to erode the Parental Rights Initiative. Every single one, without exception, even the ones who call themselves moderates, proved that they are not, in fact, moderates, because they want to take your rights away as parents and make it more difficult for you to know about these really important things that are happening in your child's life when they go to school. So by my estimation, there's not a single moderate Democrat left in the Washington State Senate, because you can't vote for that bill, you can't vote for stuff like this and call yourself a moderate. I'm hoping there's still a few left in the state House, but there's none left in the state Senate. So that's happening. And then we have our brand new Attorney General, Nick Brown, who ran as a moderate. He and Bob Ferguson, our new governor, both ran as moderates. And again, it's not a moderate position to support men competing against girls in girls' sports, boys competing against girls. That's not a moderate position. That's a very unpopular position nationally. The polls are something at like 75% of Americans don't support that. So that's not a moderate position, yet it's the position that Attorney General Nick Brown and Governor Bob Ferguson are taking, and the Superintendent of Public Instruction are taking. More on that in a moment. And it is most certainly not a moderate position to push back against President Donald Trump's executive order protecting children from lifelong mutilation. Again, when you look nationally at the public opinion on that issue as to whether kids under the age of 18 should be able to undergo, with parental consent or not, life-altering gender reassignment surgery, what the media calls gender-affirming surgeries, because they use the captured language of the left. Nationally, public opinion has shifted so much on that issue. It is not a popular issue. It is not a moderate issue. It is not a mainstream issue. It is an extremist position to believe that those are okay procedures for children to undergo. So where's our moderate Attorney General and our moderate governor on these issues? Well, right now they're fighting back against the Trump administration. Attorney General Nick Brown holding a press conference announcing that the state will sue the Trump administration over President Donald Trump's order protecting kids from gender mutilation.
We are suing today because this order like so many other things this president is doing, is illegal and unconstitutional. But having read this order very, very closely, I need to say something more. This president's order is gross. It is disgusting. It is hateful. And so we will always take action against illegal conduct.
Wow.
But this one has special resonance because of the hate behind it. It promotes harassment and discrimination against people that are already marginalized. It risks their literal health and safety and that of their providers. We are requesting a temporary restraining order to immediately halt the harm that is being done because this is an emergency.
That's really, really disappointing. Disappointing doesn't even begin. We had Nick Brown in this studio, and he sat over there with me, and he acted, for all intents and purposes, like a moderate Democrat. That he would only take on fights with the Trump administration that were absolutely necessary, that he would be hesitant to fall into what his predecessor, who's now our governor, Bob Ferguson, did, where all he did for the first 4 years of the Trump administration is fight him tooth and nail on every single ideological issue under the sun. But now we know he's going to continue down that path, and on something as extreme as this, call it what it is extremism. And for him to say that they want to halt the harm being done, just last week in this state, a 16-year-old girl went to Seattle Children's Hospital for a scheduled surgery that her parents supported to get her healthy breasts cut off because she thinks she's a boy. President Trump's executive order saved that girl from that fate. Have you ever seen the images of these young kids who get their breasts cut off and have a 1.5 foot long scar again across their chest for the rest of their lives? And we've talked to detransitioners who go on a couple years later to regret it, to talk about the emotional devastation that it has wreaked on their lives, but they cannot undo it. And Attorney General Nick Brown, the moderate Democrat, wants to act as if stopping that is harmful. As if allowing kids to go forward with things like that is just and will prevent harm in their lives. It's truly insane stuff. So it's been all of 2 weeks. Attorney General Nick Brown has shown he is not a moderate at all. He wants to call it hateful for Donald Trump to do what should have been done a long time ago. And an issue, by the way, as I said, that most Americans, a majority of Americans, including many people who vote Democratic, do not believe kids should be able to have these surgeries. So Attorney General Nick Brown is calling you hateful. If you don't believe kids should be able to have their breasts cut off or their genitals removed before they're 18 years old because they believe they're a different gender, Attorney General Nick Brown believes you're hateful and bigoted and a bad person. That he is the extremist. It's insane stuff. I'd also note, there's fear, of course, for hospitals that have stopped this. Seattle Children's Hospital, they said that they're stopping these surgeries indefinitely because it would cost them federal funding that helps, in other areas like childhood cancer and things that are not controversial in the slightest, and they're not going to sacrifice one for the other. So that's happening. But of course, the other issue going on is Washington State and the money that President Donald Trump says he's going to withhold if you allow in your state, in high school athletics, biological boys to compete against girls. So, of course, our state is also fighting against that. And Chris Reichdahl, the superintendent of public instruction, just thinks that that's horrifying. He's an extremist. He's in the minority on this, but he acts like these are the values of Washington State. Is it the value of Washington State to allow biological boys to compete against girls? I don't think so. And I don't think the polls bear that out. He put out a statement again, so we've got fighting. Attorney General's office is fighting the Trump administration on this stuff. With the support of Bob Ferguson, the governor, and the head of our public school system falling in line, he put out a statement saying the 47th president of the United States is disregarding the rule of law by attempting to unilaterally impose an attack on the specific student groups that anti-discrimination laws aim to protect. The president's order directly contradicts state law. Our state law prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity, and we will not back down from that. What about the girls is what I would ask to that. You have superintendent of public instruction who is out there fighting for what? The rights of 0.01% of our student population, while ignoring the rights and the real, very real concerns of 50% of our student population. The girls we've had on this show who have talked about their experiences of hate and harassment, who've lost important races, who wanted to go on to collegiate athletics, but they can't freaking win the most important races because they're being beat by biological boys. He doesn't care about them at all. He cares about pandering to a small segment of the Democratic Party. I really believe that we're talking about here in terms of Democratic voters, a small fraction who support this kind of stuff. And I would also point out for Superintendent of Public Instruction Kruse Reykdal, when he says that the 47th President of the United States is disregarding the rule of law by doing this unilaterally. Who was it less than a year ago who blatantly came out and said he was going to disregard the rule of law by not implementing the Parental Rights Initiative after it was signed into law? Who did that? Kruse Reykdal. You'll remember the day that the Parental Rights Initiative was signed into law, where public school systems were going to have to come out and they were going to have to keep parents informed of all these things happening in their kids' school. Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kruse Reykdal, put out this long statement. And in it, he talked about, we think that this is a violation of federal privacy rights for students, and we're not going to out students to their parents or whatever it is. So he, speaking of what he said about Trump, the 47th president of the United States is disregarding the rule of law by attempting to unilaterally impose. Well, you just disregarded, and have been for many months, of your own accord, Washington state law, where you decided and proudly put out a press release saying how you were going to disregard the Parental Rights Initiative that had just been signed into law. But you have the audacity to accuse President Trump of doing something that you've been doing for many, many months. It's truly insane stuff. So this comes down to, as I said earlier, I think that a majority, I really have to believe it. I have to believe it for my sanity. We've seen national polling on this. I haven't seen as extensive of polling in Washington state. I know Washington state is very far to the left. But I do not believe reasonable people are this far to the left. So I really believe that if you polled on these issues, these are 70% plus issues across the political spectrum, that it's not okay for kids to get gender reassignment surgery, that it's not okay for biological boys to compete against girls in high school athletics or in college. So I think that there should be many more people speaking out about these issues than we're seeing speak out about them right now. There were 2 protests that I saw since this all started to go down. And both of the protests were people who are against what President Donald Trump is doing, which is crazy to me. But it just shows, you have the left and the far fringe activists who are much better in the state at mobilizing and organizing, and this is what they do, and they're able to come together in large numbers on short notice, and common sense people who are just trying to live their lives and raise a family, they're not doing those things. And that's part of the problem. There was a demonstration, this is from King 5 News, demonstrators demand Seattle Children's resume gender-affirming surgeries, and they were outside Seattle Children's protesting the hate and the Trump administration. And it just kills me inside because I know that the far left fringe, these are people who have the time and energy to go do these sorts of things. But in a perfect world, how could we not have hundreds and hundreds of people counter-protesting or going out and protesting Attorney General Nick Brown trying to sue over this stuff and just the fact that this stuff is happening and at the Capitol every single day? It boggles my mind. This is from King 5. I also want to note that they got a statement from Seattle Children's Hospital about, the news that they were pausing these surgeries. They said the executive order prohibits gender-affirming medical treatment for individuals under 19, including puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and certain surgical procedures. This is from King 5. Critics argue that this puts transgender youth at significant risk. It says, that's putting kids' lives in danger. That's hurting them actively, said a protester. Protesters are demanding that the hospital immediately resume gender-affirming surgeries and publicly reaffirm its support for transgender health care. So it says in a statement to King 5, Seattle Children's Hospital said, Seattle Children's is supporting the Washington State Attorney General's temporary restraining order in response to President Trump's January 28th executive order directing federal agencies to revoke funding for institutions providing gender-affirming care to minors. So all they're saying is we support what the Attorney General's office is doing, which is not a particular surprise. I mean, they were doing the surgeries to begin with. So obviously they support the surgeries. When they came out and paused the surgeries, they didn't say they were pausing it because the science isn't on their side. They didn't say they were pausing it because they've realized that it's the wrong thing to do. They said they were pausing it because they didn't want to lose federal funding. So of course, they're going to support the Attorney General in his efforts to be able to continue to mutilate children. Horrifying, considering all the wonderful work that Seattle Children's Hospital does to save the lives of kids who are suffering from actual issues, actual health issues, cancer, whatever it is. And they're going to lump their lot in to these extremists on the left who want to continue to butcher children. It's wild stuff. There was also this massive rally down in Olympia, hundreds of people who showed up to protest the things that Donald Trump has been doing. And I ask reasonable people, right, left, and center, where are you? What are you going to do? Are you willing to allow a small, extreme segment of our state dictate these things, or are you going to stand up and do something? Are you going to speak out? Are you going to protest? Are you going to push back? Because until we start doing it, these extremist positions are treated like the mainstream, and nothing is going to change that. I will tell you, if you're seeing this and hearing this, and you as a parent or whatever it is, a grandparent, you are just sitting there deciding, this is it. I have to get involved. I have to do more than, watch Brandi's show a few times a week, which we do appreciate. Then there's an opportunity this weekend. There's going to be a rally on the north steps of the state capitol on the 15th at noon, which I think is Saturday, right? 15th is Saturday. Saturday at noon. So you're not working probably. Some of you might be, but sometimes when we have rallies during the week, that's the excuse. I got a job, I got kids to run around, I got things to do. Can you, in the name of parental rights and sanity and all things freaking holy, come to Olympia at noon on Saturday and let legislators like Senator Jamie Peterson know that we're not going to let the government parent our kids, that we're not going to continue to let the government erode our rights as parents? So this is an opportunity to do that. But more widely, again, I implore reasonable Democrats. I was texting with friends of mine over the weekend, who were sending me that clip, or I was sending it to them, who are very progressive on every other issue, who said that they were horrified by that clip, who don't support transitional surgeries for minors, who don't support boys participating against girls. And I just tell them every time, say something. Say something. I think there's so many even Democratic lawmakers in the House who don't support these things, but are terrified to be the one that goes against their caucus. And I would ask you, what's more important than this? What's more important than standing up for families and parents and pushing back against extremism? And you will be on the right side of this issue. It might take a couple years for Democrats as a whole to collectively stop pushing this stuff. Then you could come out and say, hey, I was on the right side of this issue before any of these other Democratic lawmakers. And I know it sucks to change your mind, but I've done that. Have I not changed my mind on issues and come on this show and told tens of thousands of people, or on the internet, hundreds of thousands of people, that, hey, I supported this really extreme policy in the past and I regret it and I wish I could go back and I could change things? I'll say it again. I was once on the side that thought if parents consent to these surgeries that kids should be able to get them, and I'm embarrassed about that. I wish I could go back and change it. I wish I had done my homework more before I took that position in the name of parental rights, which is such a crazy position to have taken. So I'm willing to admit I was wrong, and I hope there's some Democratic lawmakers who can get the ball rolling and admit that they were on the wrong side of this issue as well, and that they're going to change their mind. Because again, it's the most extreme policy. It's the most extreme position to ever come out of Olympia, more extreme than police defunding, more extreme than these bills looking to let violent criminals out of prison early. This is the most extreme thing ever pushed in Olympia, ever supported by a governor of Washington State, ever supported or defended by an attorney general. And those people will end up on the wrong side of this issue. And I hope there are political consequences for them. But right now, we need to save kids. We need to do everything we can to protect kids, to stand up for kids and families, and to save kids from making decisions that they are not mature enough to make and that will hurt them for the rest of their lives. And if that's not something that will get you in the car and down on the north steps of the Capitol in Olympia on Saturday, I do not know what will. All right. Wow. That took up a lot of the show. Do I take a break? 41 minutes of the show. I could go for 7 hours on that stuff. Let's dive into a second story I wanted to talk about quickly, because it just shows, like, if the media weren't using captured language of the left, if the media weren't in bed with the Democratic Party, I don't think any of these things would have ever gotten this far. But you look at, for instance, that King 5 story that we just talked about with the protesters outside Seattle Children's Hospital demanding that they reinstate these surgeries. There was not one dissenting voice, one dissenting quote, nothing. King 5 News clearly believes that these surgeries are totally righteous and appropriate, and the Trump administration is bad, and they'll lift up the voices of the fringe minority that wants these sorts of surgeries. They're not interested at all in doing their jobs, in sharing, and even being remotely fair. They use the captured language of, gender-affirming surgeries. It's not gender-affirming. They are the gender they were born. Trying to change that by cutting off appendages or whatever it is won't affirm the gender that they believe that they are. But the media uses that because either they believe it or they don't want to be called hateful, transphobic bigots or whatever it is. So the media, if the media weren't fundamentally failing at its core obligation to all of us, this stuff never would have gotten so far. So I blame the media more than I blame anyone else. And I couldn't help but laugh at the Seattle Times story. The headline, "In a departure for Washington governors, Ferguson avoids news conferences." To which I thought, yeah, no shit. I could have told you, and I think I did months ago, that one of the biggest pitfalls of Bob Ferguson is his lack of transparency. It's one of the reasons why I could not believe that the Seattle Times would endorse Bob Ferguson. Because the Seattle Times editorial board, they're always on their high horse about, lack of transparency and public records issues, which is good, right? But then they turn around and endorse one of the least transparent politicians in the entire state. Someone whose office was repeatedly knocked for withholding documents. Like, this is who he's always been. And now the Seattle Times newsroom wants to, oh my gosh, Bob Ferguson isn't holding routine media availabilities as previous Washington governors have done. According to the Seattle Times, Ferguson has not held a single general media availability, the televised question and answer periods that past governors have usually held weekly at the Capitol to discuss it. Ferguson has so far shown no interest in subjecting himself to such open-ended quizzing. From the newsroom that never called him out for any of his nonsense during the campaign. Lie after lie, and instead they were just obsessed with whatever Dave Reichert had to say or not say about Donald Trump that week. So you have a newsroom, the actual newsroom portion of it, that totally let him off the hook for lies during the entirety of his campaign for governor and during his time as Attorney General. You have the editorial side of things that endorsed him for governor despite knowing and personally having knocked him for his lack of transparency. Now they're like, oh my God, he's not holding news conferences. This is from Brianna Aho, who's the spokesperson for Governor Bob Ferguson, who told the Seattle Times, "I don't know that a decision has been made to never do it," she said. She said Ferguson is planning immediate availability on a specific subject, the state budget, during the final week of February, but he declined to be interviewed for this article. So she's even saying, well, he hasn't said he'll never do it, but he clearly feels no pressure or obligation to do it. He's going to hold one at the last week in February, though. And he declined to be interviewed for this article. You think? You guys have never held him accountable for anything during his time as AG, during his time as a candidate for governor. Quite the opposite. You covered for him. And now you're surprised that he doesn't have enough respect for you to hold media availabilities as other Washington governors have done? You did that to yourselves. And you did it to all of us. People who actually would have held him accountable. Members of the media who want to hold him accountable, who want to hear what he has to say, who want him to be questioned. You took it easy on him, and now he's taking advantage of that by saying, well, I'm not going to tell you guys anything. I'm not going to come and answer your questions, and why would he? Not to mention, just last week, wasn't it? We covered on the show, Bob Ferguson's press person sending out a page of directives to all state agencies, essentially saying, don't talk to the media without our consent. Tell us if a media organization, it was a communications guidance from Brianna Aho. Tell us before you do any media interviews so we can get our messaging correct. And then when he was Attorney General just a few weeks before he took office, going out and saying, of his domestic violent extremism task force members aren't allowed to talk to the media. You can't talk to the media about any of this without getting your messaging. And we're surprised that he's not holding press conferences. It's truly insane. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about some pro-crime bills that have unfortunately advanced in Olympia. First, if you're thinking about selling your home, reach out to our friend Wes Jones at sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com. Wes, first of all, the overarching thing that we hear about Wes is the communication is fantastic. It can be a stressful experience selling your home, but listener Sue told us, whenever she had a concern, like for instance, selling her home in the winter months, Wes was able to communicate with her, answer all of her questions, and put her at ease.
It's time for me to go home, back to Wenatchee. That's where my mom is, and she's getting up there in age. So I need to help her and start thinking about my own retirement. So
did you feel like, get the sense that Wes had a plan, knew what he was talking about? How comfortable did he make you during the process?
Oh, he made me feel very comfortable. He answered all my questions, and he responded to them by email or text, whatever I needed. Just kind of an extra helping hand here and there whenever I needed it. He was always there to support me, and his team is just wonderful.
Yeah, so communication is great, obviously, but the proof's in the pudding, and he was also able to get her home sold quickly and for over list price, which was awesome as well. So sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, reach out to Wes Jones. He'll start by giving you a free market analysis so you can kind of know how well your home is positioned, what you might be able to reasonably expect to get for it. Sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, I've been encouraging you guys to take the First Mark Challenge, firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. We all need insurance, right? Are you getting the best insurance that you can get at the best price? Well, First Mark will help you figure that out. If you take the First Mark Challenge, this is what it is. You sign up, call them, set aside a little bit of time to go over your current insurance, talk about your insurance needs. They'll go out, they'll shop the market for you. They'll come back with their recommendations, and they might tell you, hey, your current insurance is great. I would stick with it. There's nothing we can do for you. Or they'll tell you like they did for, we've heard from Spencer. He says they saved him $1,600 a year. Chad says they're saving him $100 a month. We even heard from someone, Beth, who said they're saving her $4,000 a year, which who could not use $4,000 a year? So again, you all need insurance. If you're looking to cut spending, save a little money on your family budget, just see if First Mark Insurance can save you money on the insurance that you're already using. Firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. The very best part is they work for you. Okay, I'm going to try to get to, I spent a lot of time on parental rights today, so I might skip over national news if that's okay with all of you. But I have to talk about, I think an issue that the parental rights thing is important, but there's a lot of other things happening in Olympia that also demand our attention. And one of them are these pro-crime bills that are being pushed by the Public Safety Committee. And I think it just never ceases to amaze me when you look at the Public Safety Committee, how many bills come out of that committee that are very clearly making the public less safe. It almost seems like that's what the committee is designed to do. It's like, how can we erode safety in our communities? How can we make life easier for criminals? And they really seem to have no care or concern. I'm not talking about all the committee members. I'm talking about the Democrats, frankly. They seem to have no care or concern for crime victims and for considering the voices of crime victims when they hear these bills, when they debate these bills, and when they get input from the public. So late last week, as we expected, two bills we've covered on the show quite a bit, House Bill 1125 and House Bill 1178, have now moved past the House Public Safety Committee. So we're expecting them to be voted on in the House, and then we'll see what happens on the Senate side. But of course, House Bill 1125 expands judicial discretion. And this is the bill that would allow a judge to go back and to end a prison sentence early in the interest of justice. So no finality for victims. And then House Bill 1178 has to do with watering down sentencing enhancements. So, used a gun to commit a crime? No big deal. Gang member who recruited a juvenile gang member to commit a felony for you? No big deal. Cooking meth around children? No big deal. We're going to ease sentencing enhancements for you. It's just really, really insane stuff. And since the Public Safety Committee does not appear to care about the voices of victims and including those as part of the conversation, we want to make sure that we elevate the voices of victims. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. So on Sundays with Subscribers, we heard from a woman named Terry Noble. I was so glad she reached out to me. It just actually was a Facebook comment. I was talking about these two bills, and she commented and said that her son Levi was murdered in 2004 by his roommate. They were having disagreements, as roommates do, but disagreement turned deadly, and Levi's roommate shot him multiple times and killed him. This is back in 2004. And Terry Noble at the time, there wasn't a lot of help for victims' families to help them navigate the process. It just wasn't something that there was a lot of attention to. And so she took it upon herself. I mean, not only did she spend a lot of time advocating for her son and to try to make sure that her son's killer got a sentence that even reasonably resembled justice, but she went on from there, and for 15 years, Terry worked with crime victims. After losing her own son, think about that, the pain, and she took all that pain and frustration and she channeled it into helping the families of other people who have lost loved ones to homicide for 15 years. But during that time, and as she told me, she became so frustrated and mortified with how little care there seemed to be for the voices of crime victims, and with some of these pro-criminal bills that would routinely be introduced and even passed in Olympia. Here's part of my conversation from Sundays with Subscribers with Terry Noble. What would it have been like, and what would have been different for you if your family had lived these last 20 years knowing that at any time the person who killed Levi, a judge could cut their prison sentence early?
Yeah, I just can't even imagine what that is like. And part of it for us was there was supposed to be a truth in sentence. And so this was a sentence they are supposed to serve. And through the years, just with what has happened, those change, and there's good time. But the thought of having a radicalized judge or even prosecutor or anybody at a whim to release them without, and really they say there's supposed to be input from the victim, but I highly doubt that.
Yeah. So imagine apply this to your work as a victim's advocate. If this bill passes, if HB 1125 becomes law and judges can end prison sentences early in the interest of justice, what do you think victims are going to go through?
Hell. It's just going to be continued victimization. And even when I was still a victim advocate, as close as a couple of years ago, we finally just started telling families that this is the sentencing range, this is what the offer is, but please don't hold that to truth, because there's so many things that are changing, and the good time marker keeps moving, and you just can't truthfully tell them to rely on this date, because it's not going to happen.
Do you think it's hyperbole? I say this on the show all the time, and feel free to tell me if you think it's hyperbole or off base based on your experience. Sometimes I just really feel like in this state, the needs of the criminal outweigh the needs of the victim. That things are sort of done to cater to the criminal and not the victim. Do you get that sense, or is that an exaggeration?
Oh, no, absolutely. Everything caters toward the defendant. I mean, I'm getting ready to put a class on advocacy after homicide up in Washington at the end of April. And there's a huge part of it. And I have a schematic that shows a circle with all the players in it. And then there's the circle with the victim over here on the outside, because you do not get to participate in any process except for a bail hearing and a sentencing hearing. That is the only time you have a right to speak.
Yeah, and apparently you really don't even have a right to speak at some of these hearings, because they'll let literally remote testimony from prison inmates. Prisoner after prisoner after prisoner talk about how, the law needs to be changed to benefit them. And there are so few victims. Now, I don't blame all of that on the committee. I think very few victims and their families are willing to put themselves over and over in those positions because it's hard. And I can't even imagine losing a family member to murder, feeling like you're ignored already through the process. The person who killed your family member gets a slap on the wrist. I mean, how many times have you heard that? And then on top of all of that, you go to get re-victimized by sitting in a committee hearing where half the members don't care at all what you have to say. So I was happy that Terry Noble was willing to talk to us and really reiterate specific to these two bills, House Bill 1125 and House Bill 1178, that these bills will be horrifying for families. The idea that for 20 years, as she said, that if she had to sit there and wonder and think that at any time the person who killed her son, an activist judge, could just let them out of prison. I mean, think about what, again, appealing to Democrats in Olympia who are going to vote on these. Think about what you're doing to victims' families. Think about what the agony, the mental agony that will put them through for years to come. And ask yourself if that's really what you intend to do. Because that's what will happen. Terry Noble, there's no better person to talk about what victims will go through than her. And her son is not the only family member she's lost to homicide. Having lost multiple family members to crime, and then spending 15 years of her life advocating for other crime victims, she knows better than any single Democratic lawmaker what this will do to crime victims. So the question for those Democrats is, do you care? Do you care? And if the answer is yes, then you cannot possibly support either of these bills. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure that you take time to sign up for their newsletter. You can be alerted to opportunities to do just that, whether it's opportunities to try to get involved, opportunities to push back against bills, or just become more aware of some of the stuff that's happening in Washington state. So future42.org. All right, really excited. Tomorrow we're launching a new show that's part of our unDivided offerings. It's called Doge Watch, where Zach Abraham with Bulwark Capital and I are going to every single week do a half hour on all things Doge. What is Elon Musk doing? What is he cutting? How bad are people freaking out? We'll also talk about some Washington state economic news and other things related to government regulation and oversight and all of that. So I'm excited. We'll have that debuting. It's not going to be a live show. It's going to be something that publishes across our platform. So be on the lookout for that. We've really enjoyed having Zach Abraham on the show once a week, and we're excited to expand into this half-hour show. Zach is the chief investment officer at Bulwark Capital, and they really specialize in, actively monitoring what's happening in the U.S. economy, around the world, in the markets, to make sure that they are managing risk associated with your retirement portfolio. I mean, risk management is their number one focus. So when it comes to your retirement, we all have what the plan is. We want to make sure that the dream retirement that we have is actually going to be able to come to fruition, that we have enough money to fund it. So it's always smart, given how important that is, to get a second opinion when it comes to critical decisions with your retirement. Zach Abraham, Chief Investment Officer at Bulwark Capital, says same as you would for a health decision, that you'd get a second opinion. It's no different when it comes to the health of your retirement portfolio. So you can get that second opinion with Bulwark's free Know Your Risk Portfolio Review. You'll get a free review of how Bulwark is always looking for opportunities to lower risk, lower cost, and give your retirement as much upside as possible. You only get one retirement. Get a second opinion. Schedule your free portfolio review at knowyourriskradio.com. Don't put it off. knowyourriskradio.com. Okay, let's get to our daily subscriber show poll. I'm going to leapfrog. Sorry, I got to leapfrog Unbelievable today just because we have to be out relatively on time today, and I spent 45 minutes railing against Democrats on parental rights issues. I asked you guys, this is a fun one. I saw this on my flight back from D.C. Why did it take us so long to do this? So President Donald Trump came out and he directed the U.S. Treasury to stop minting new pennies. So I asked you on Patreon Locals Next, do you agree with this decision? Yes or no? Nicole? Yes, stop minting them or keep minting those humble pennies.
Oh, I'm all about saving.
He says it costs 2 cents to make every one.
Yeah, saving money. And then also, do you see how many people waste them on art projects and they're around the park? At this
they're
point,
flooring. I've seen people make flooring out of them.
So at this point, they're pretty much, litter. So I say I'm in.
How will you make change, though? My only hesitancy is if you're at a store and, with taxes and all of that, and you're somebody who wants to use cash, because cash is legal tender, you have to accept, some people get around it, but I don't want to see every single store do away with taking cash because some people still rely on cash to everything. So what if you have to make change and they don't have pennies to make the change?
Well, he's not saying get rid of the ones we already have.
No, but eventually.
So maybe you'll start having to pull them out of the floors.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to the store. I know I need $8.16 to buy eggs. Hold up, that's pretty low. I know I need $13.16 to buy eggs. So can you rip one of those pennies out of the floor for me?
I'm guessing he knows that like we have extra pennies around.
Well, I mean,
we don't need them.
I have probably $100 in pennies in my penny jar.
Oh yeah.
Every household has a penny jar. You're just going to have to bust it open, right?
Yep.
I was surprised this wasn't even more lopsided. 84% saying, yes, I support this. 16% saying no. Tim Walters, more important issues for him to worry about, like staying out of Gaza. Joel Locke, it's the price for common sense. Let me see. Want to move mama. If all the pennies being hoarded were put into circulation, we'd have plenty to tide us over for a lifetime. Why make more just so the hoarders can keep more? That's really true. At this point, they're just being hoarded. Rick Seattle, I voted no, though it wouldn't be that big of a deal. During travels to other countries, when cash is used, they often round up or down. It's not a big deal. Can still track to the penny for electronic transactions, especially financial. Bottom line, it's no big deal either way. Yeah, I mean, if it's costing 2 cents per penny to mint it, that seems like a really stupid thing to do.
Seems like a waste.
Seems like a job
Seems
for
like-
Doge.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Donald Trump just did it himself. Why? I don't know. People use actual bills and coins to pay these days, so I guess it shouldn't matter, especially if it's costing more to produce pennies than they're worth, but I didn't vote because I'm unsure of the consequences of this. I don't know what the consequences are either. Other than, this can make me sound really dumb. It's the Lincoln Memorial on the penny, right?
Well, it's
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
On the head on one side and the memorial on the other.
I believe so.
So is it offensive to the memory of Abe Lincoln? No, because he's also on the $5 bill.
Correct.
You know what I found out this weekend?
What?
So I went to the Library of Congress, which was awesome when I was in DC. Highly recommend going if you've never been. And they had this really cool display where it had everything that was in Lincoln's pockets when he was killed at Ford Theater.
Oh, wow.
And it had been in his family for a long time, and then it got donated to the Library of Congress. So it was like these little spectacles, and I think it was a little pocket knife or something, and just a bunch of little, just random stuff. And then it was a crisp $5 Confederate bill. So I was like, is that why he's on the $5 bill? Because he had a $5 bill in
interesting.
his pocket when he died? I didn't see anything that led me to believe that. But isn't that kind of a coincidence? That he had a $5 bill in his pocket and now his face is on the $5 bill? Anyway, I
Maybe
thought
that's
it was very interesting.
I think that's a good assumption.
Well, I don't know. I kind of Googled that. It didn't seem, nobody was saying that directly. So maybe I missed it. But
I went to
found it
the.
interesting.
Did you stop by the theater where he was killed?
Yeah. Well, we didn't
went
stop
there.
by, but we actually walked past it on our way to the Waldorf Astoria,
Right.
formerly the Trump Hotel.
Yep.
And we went and just pretended it was still the Trump Hotel. And had a nice drink. But yeah, we walked right past it. It was very unassuming. It's not this like grand sort of theater thing. It's very, super unassuming.
You have to know what it is to identify it, or like you have to know where he was killed to really recognize that's where he was killed.
Yeah, I mean, it says like the Ford Theater, but it doesn't say where.
That's
where
what I mean.
Lincoln was murdered, you know, and there
Yep.
was a bunch of school children in it. So I was like, I saw the school kids, and I was like, what are they doing there? And then it said Ford Theater. But you're right. If you didn't know he was killed at the Ford Theater, you'd be like, that's very, very, very confusing. All right, let's get to some comments. Let's see. Weiss Castle, I do think parental rights is the single most winning strategy for Washington Republicans to build a platform on. Well, what I really think needs to happen, and had you asked me a year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago if I thought running an initiative when it came to gender-affirming surgeries was smart, I would say no. But public opinion is shifting so quickly on it, I think that Let's Go Washington or someone should just run an initiative that says we should ban gender reassignment surgeries for children under the age of 18. Because that's a very cut and dry. I think it will be successful, and let's figure it out. Do Washingtonians support it or do they not? And I know it seems like, again, because 3 years ago if you ran that, they'd be like, oh, Republicans are so extreme. But I think it's a much easier sell now, especially since it's happening at the federal level. Like, let's just get public opinion on this issue. Should we ban these surgeries for kids under 18 or not? The one thing I'll say about Trump's order, I don't think 19-year-olds should be included in it. Because again,
well, it's under 19. Or
is it under? I think it's 9. No, I think it's 19 and under.
I think he's including the 18-year-olds.
I think he's including 19-year-olds too.
Okay.
I could be wrong too, but that was my interpretation of it. And if so, that's ridiculous because again, we have to decide what the age of majority is. And so there's all these things. I mean, in Washington State, there's so many things you can't do until you're 18 or 21, yet we allow kids to make these decisions, critical health care. So it all makes no sense. So I just think we have to have some logical consistency on when someone is an adult. And when they're an adult, frankly, if it's up to me, they should be able to drink. They should be able to smoke weed. They can serve our country. They can do all these things. So is it 18? Is it 21? Where do we want it to be? Is it 19?
It's for anyone under 19.
Under 19. So you don't think it includes 19?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Serena Johnson, I cannot imagine putting a child on medication for mental health without a parent knowing, and then the child has an allergic reaction to the medication or goes schizophrenic, etc., and the parent has no idea what could be wrong with their child. How frightening. I have to agree. Kenneth Bates, a $50 super chat. Wow. Nice. Keep speaking truth to power. This week's coffee is on me. Yeah, that is a week's worth of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to buy less coffee. It's such a, so I'm just like, maybe a couple a week where I actually go buy it. And then I make my little, I got my espresso over there. And I just have my little espresso. But Kenneth, if that's for like my coffee at work, that's like a month's worth of my coffee at work.
Oh,
it's
at
like
work, there you
80
go.
cents per espresso that I make.
I was going to say, at this
figured the
point,
math out.
it's like 3 coffees.
Yeah.
They're so expensive.
Charlie K, lightening sentences encourages crime. Either there's no fear of the consequences and our judges more and more cannot seem to discern if there is no remorse so that they won't reoffend. Yeah, I mean, also the idea, and I keep going back to, first of all, no finality for victims. So you are constantly in this state of wondering when the person who hurt you or a loved one is going to get out of prison. That is not fair. That's so insane. I mean, it's beyond the pale. But also, you're going to allow judges who weren't the judges that heard the original trial to be the ones to then go back and say, you get out of prison early because your sentence no longer serves the interest of justice. So you have a judge that didn't hear the witness testimony. They can read it on paper. It's not the same. Overriding, essentially the desires of a jury. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I can't even believe a bill like this exists, let alone it got unanimous Democratic support coming out of the House Public Safety Committee. Jeanette Miller. Don't they think President Trump has enough lawyers going over his mandates? Good grief. Washington won't make any changes for the next 4 years with 12 years of Inslee, now Bob and his buddies. When will King County dry up? Like dry up in terms of like future governors and stuff? Never.
Yeah.
I mean, they're crazy ideas, and they're they keep exporting their crazy ideas to Olympia, and then the politicians who come up with them rise through the ranks.
And people blindly follow. That's the thing. People
100%.
are not really investigating these people that are running for these positions. They are blindly following.
Well, and also, you do realize, you probably do, that this is all preordained. They have a pecking order. The pecking order was always going to be that Bob was next up, that Nick Brown was next up to replace Bob, and so on and so on and so forth. So they already have, and I've heard who it might be. I've heard who whenever Bob Ferguson decides not to run for governor anymore, I've heard who the pecking order is placing next. It might just be a certain congresswoman from the 10th. They want to give a woman of color an opportunity to be governor. That's what I've heard. That's Marilyn Strickland. That the powers that be are saying if she wants it after Bob Ferguson, she gets to be the next governor. That's how much control Democrats have. Because they don't allow sort of this open primary process. They didn't with Mark Mullet. They shut him down real quick. So there's no allowance for voters to be the ones that drive the decision making. No, the Democratic Party decides you go here, you go here, you go here, and then you go here. And then voters only elect Democrats, so whatever they ordain comes true. Crazy. It's just crazy.
It is.
All right. I got a time for a couple more comments here. Kelly, regarding the initiatives, no, they, our representatives, do not care about victims. Our system is broken, and there is no truth in sentencing. Our family has testified numerous times on several crime bills. They do not give us, the time or hear us. They give more time to the radicals and the supporters of criminals versus us survivors and victims. It is very difficult. We have fought for years to keep the person who murdered our father and one other, plus left our mom for dead, behind bars. The fight is never over. You can never heal. We must fight. And that is, and I'm familiar with your story, and that is a horrible thing to put you through and to continue to put people through who have already been through the worst thing imaginable. And when you hear that truth in sentencing, we're supposed to have truth in sentencing. And the point of that is that there's an expectation that if this is the sentence you're given, everyone involved knows that's the sentence you're going to serve. And everyone accounts for good time. Good time for most crimes is a third off the top. Families of victims know that you go in, you get 20 years, you're probably going to serve 16 and you'll be out if you behave behind bars. But imagine that never being final. That's a horrifying thing, and every Democrat who votes for it should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. They won't be, though. Deanne Wade, my frustration is that I see government overreach being fixed in other states, but Washington is doubling down on its overreach, and it's spending my daily action alert. So I've been putting out these daily action alerts, and speaking of spending, doubling, tripling down on spending. So again, you'll have already seen this on Patreon or on Facebook and X and on Locals and in Patreon. I put it in the comments of the episode just because I don't want to bombard you with new emails every single day. But the action alert I put out tomorrow morning, the House Finance Committee is going to hear public hearing on House Bill 1334. That's the bill to increase your property taxes. That's the bill that would lift the property tax levy lid from 1% to 3%, which means that your county executive or whatever local entity governs your property taxes can decide to raise your property taxes 3% like that without a vote of the people. Right now, they can only do it at 1% at a time. So they can triple now your property tax increase from 1% to 3% without asking your permission. So please fulfill the daily action alert. Nicole, have you done it yet?
I haven't yet.
Okay, well, that's honest.
I've been a little bit
but you're going
preoccupied
to
this morning.
Okay.
But I will.
So Nicole's going to do the daily action alert. I, of course, do the daily action alert. You can, however you feel about it, if you're in support of higher property taxes, by all means, this is a democracy. Note your opinion for the record. But I tend to think that most people aren't in support of that. And so make sure that you take our daily action alert before it's too late. I think by like 5 p.m. tonight or something like that, you need to have your position. It takes like literally 30 seconds. So do that. All right. Like I said, we kind of got to finish the show on time today. So is it okay if I bypass sanity check as well? I spent 45 minutes.
Anything's okay. You're the boss.
I spent 45 minutes talking about giving everyone a sanity check. So maybe we'll do a double dose of Unbelievable tomorrow. We'll have an extra good sanity check for you tomorrow. By the way, am I missing something?
Important national.
We had a ton of stuff. We'll just move it on over. By the way, if you haven't figured it out by now, the legacy media has failed us. There is no coming back for them. But don't worry, Undivided is here to make up for their failures. So if you have not become a subscriber to Undivided, please do so. That's how we continue to do this work. That's how we continue to expand our work. You can sign up. It's just $5 a month at undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com. Just click on the red box that says support the show for $5. We make it super easy. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Missed you guys over the weekend. I do. Whenever I am gone, I miss you guys. But back in DC, came back feeling extra patriotic. My brother met me there. We yelled at some anti-Semitic protesters. That was fun. We didn't storm the Capitol or anything like that. But we had a really good time. And I had a good time at LibertyCon as well. Met some fun libertarians who were out there just trying to get the government off our back.
Love it.
It's an uphill battle, as you know. All right, we'll see you guys back here on the live show tomorrow at noon, and be on the lookout for our first episode of Doge Watch. How many episodes until Elon Musk retweets us? 5? As far as I know, there is not another show strictly focused on Doge Watch. It's going to be a once weekly, half-hour show, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
It will be.
5 weeks before Elon retweets us.
Okay.
Farewell.